Did everyone get a brownie? They're awesome brownies. I mean, you might sugar crush a little bit, but it's definitely worth it. I recommend it if you haven't got one. So yeah, continuing our awesome Red Ladies block, here at the sidetrack, we have Monica, who is from San Francisco, and she can be best described as screaming cat face tada emoji. So please welcome Monica.
Oh man, I didn't realize this was the ladies block. I'm so much more excited now. So I'm super happy about this talk because I get to talk about 3 things that I'm very excited about, and that's emoji, always, and art and web components, which is like a new thing that I've discovered I really like. And the only thing that would make this talk better would be cats, so here's a little tiny one. Hi everyone, I'm Monica. I'm not Waldorf on GitHub and Twitter and internet places. And I work on Polymer, which is a library that helps you write web components. And I'm going to tell you what web components are and what Polymer does later. Because now I want to talk about art. So before I became a developer, I was convinced that I was going to be an architect because all of my life I drew things and I painted things and I took courses and I really like making art. But it turns out art is kind of hard. So now in my 30s, I decided that I'm going to take up pottery. And unlike painting and drawing where you can like stash things that you've made under your bed, my kitchen is now covered in like tiny little pots because I can't make like cups that are human-sized yet because I don't know how. So I just have like cups for dolls everywhere and they're taking away all of my space. So art is kind of hard and it takes a lot of practice. And even if you're like a talented painter like Van Gogh, this is a painting called Bedroom in Arles. Even if you're naturally talented and you woke up and you're amazing, it still takes a lot of effort because when you are that good and you can draw anything that you want, you start having different problems like, oh, my composition's off, my colors are off, it doesn't express the thing that I really want. So this one time at Christmas, like 15 years ago, I came home and my mom was like, oh, I gotta show you this thing that I discovered. And she shows me this like amazing painting that she painted of like a landscape or a street in Paris, I don't remember. And the reason why this is important is because my mother is not a talented person, she's not an artistic person, she can draw. And I was like, how have you managed to produce this? And it turns out it was a paint by numbers. And that's when I realized that people really enjoy making art, even if they're not good at it, if you give them the right tools. So in this case, paint by numbers is really enjoyable if you're not naturally talented. It like restricts the problem to something that's very small. It tells you what colors to put where, and at the end you get this like awesome thing that looks pretty, and then you get to show it to people. Because art is fun. You get to make things. You get to like spend a little bit of time and produce something. And sharing art is really fun. She didn't like make this painting and like hide it away in the basement. She showed it to me and she's like, look at this thing that I made, isn't it awesome? I'm Van Gogh. She's not. And we know sharing art is fun because who here has, raise your hand if you've never taken a photo and put it on the internet? Yeah, everybody takes photos and you put them on the internet so all your friends see them. There's a whole industry of apps that put filters on your Instagram photos so that they're pretty and artsy. Last year, this like app came out that was called Prisma, and it made everything look like a painting, and it was like super popular for like 3 weeks because we like making shit. We like making pretty shit and being like, look what I make, look at my artistic talent. And you know what is really good at sharing? The web. All of these things are on the web. They're on like this fantastic cloud we have. We don't like print them out and give them to people anymore. We put them on the web. So I'm going to show you some things that I like about making art on the web. So they're like apps that I've seen that go around. So the first one is something called Octopus Holdings. So John, and I'm going to butcher his last name, Hergenroder from the Recurse Center made this thing where basically you just put words that represent emoji in your URL, and then they get stacked. So this is a cat wearing a necktie using pants on an elephant, and it's turtles all the way down. And it's really easy to share because it's just an URL. You give it to people, they can see what you made. It's very easy to understand, so the tools are very simple. Like the problem of you making art is very simple. You can only just like use emoji, and it's going to be amazing. And it's kind of fun. You get to like make dumb things. What else can you put in there? It starts with like the reason why it's called an octopus holdings is that if you don't put anything, it's like an octopus holding a trophy. So that's kind of awesome. Jen Schiffer made this awesome Make 8-Bit Art project where it's like like Paint from 1992. And you get to draw with pixels. So it's like simpler than me giving you a pen and pencil, because that's kind of hard. You have to like figure out how to hold a pen. But pixels are easier. There's fewer of them. You can increase the resolution. The colors are more limited. And you get to like, this is my attempt to draw a cat, and it's terrible. But the reason why I know it's really fun and people really like it, and again, people really like sharing this art, is that a lot of people will tweet at her and be like, look at this thing. I've used Make 8-bit art to like work on a game with my kid who's 6. And this is amazing. These are like kids using Make 8-bit art to make art on the web. We're like exposing kids to making art with code and technology early on, which is kind of awesome. On a similar vein, my friend Juan made this thing called Megamoji, where it's kind of also like Make 8-bit art because it's like a pixel drawer, but instead of you drawing with colors, you draw with emoji. And it also takes this other amazing tool that we have in the real world, like tracing. So if you're not really good at art, but you want to draw something, sometimes you'll like trace it on a different piece of paper. So this is a lot like that. I had a really bad day once, so I spent like an hour just making dumb shit. This is a cat that I've made out of emoji using Megamoji. And it was really fun, because it's very simple. I just traced the cat emoji. And now it like all circles out. See, I've like started with a thing with emoji, and then into drawing, and now back to emoji. This is Emoji Brush that Sam Saccone made. And it's literally a brush that's emoji, and you just draw on a canvas, and that's it. That's all you do. And it's really awesome, and a lot of people will like use it to make dumb things with it. I think she's Lady Elite on Twitter. She'll like draw things of people and like tweet them at them and be like, look, I've made your portrait in Emoji Brush. And again, this is really fun because it's a very easy and sort of like joyful project to do. So the reason why I'm telling you all of this, because I think we're really good at making art more accessible to people and more friendly by giving them better brushes. We've like learned this over the years. We have color by numbers, we have tracing, we have all of these apps that make it really easy for you to create things. And if you believe me that that's true, then I think the same thing is true for the web. The web can be made more accessible and fun, and by that I mean making apps on the web can be made more accessible and fun if you give the web better brushes. Because the same argument can be made for both things. And by better brushes, I mean something better than a div. Because I like a div, but it's basically the pen and pencil equivalent to the web, where you still like have to learn how to hold the div, and how to style it, and how to size it, and vertically center it, and all sorts of things like that. So the web is really good at semantics. And in HTML5, we got awesome things like header and nav and article that tell you what those elements do. They don't look any different. They just look like, divs of text, but they at least tell you what they're supposed to do. So if you put a header, that should probably be at the top, and the article somewhere in the middle, and there's a footer at the bottom. And the future you is going to like reread this page. It's going to be much easier than if you had just a pile of P's and divs where hopefully you put a class equals header somewhere so that you knew that like I meant to put this at the top. The other thing that the web is really good at is encapsulation. And this is one of my favorite things about the web. So there's like these magical elements that we have in the browser that do magical things, like video or input. Input has like 21 different types. It can do color picking, and it can upload files. But you never actually have to wonder how they're implemented. They just like come to you, and you get to use them, and you're like, sweet, this is amazing. But if you can actually look and peek inside of them. There's a flag in Chrome called Enable User Agent Shadow Roots. And you can actually peek inside these elements. So input, for example, just the text field has just one div in it. It's like a content editable div. That's kind of cool. The moment you put something like type equals number on it, which is like a number flicker that can go up and down, it already becomes more complicated. It has all of these divs. It has some like pseudos in it. So if you've ever tried to style those like parts of an input element, and you're like, you need to do : dash webkit dash something, that's where they come from. That pseudo is like a little bridge that you can reach into this element and be like, I really need to style this spin button. And the reason why this is important is because these divs and these styles don't go outside of the input element. That's why you can't just reach and style anything in it. You can only style things that like that element really wants you to style. And that's why encapsulation is awesome. Something like a video element is actually ginormous and terrifying. It's got like ranges and buttons and a shit ton of divs. And yeah. So cool. Encapsulation is really awesome. So if semantics are awesome and encapsulation is awesome, that means like we can keep waiting, and the web's going to give us something like Emoji Brush, which is semantically expressive. It's a brush of emoji, and it's encapsulated because God knows how Sam actually implemented this. Nobody needs to know. But we're never going to give it. Like the Blink team will never just let you put an emoji brush in Chrome. That's not a thing we can do. But that's what web components do. And that's why I really like them. They take this idea of semantics and encapsulation that the browser already has and has been using it, and giving it to you as developers so that you can use it as well. And components in and of themselves are not special. Like React has components, Angular has components. But the reason why web components are really awesome is that they're framework agnostic. They're a thing that the browser speaks, which means you can write a web component in like vanilla JavaScript and use it in a React app and use it in an Ember app, because Tom is sitting right there, so I have to mention Ember. And they're really awesome. They interop with everything because, they're browser language. It's anywhere where you could use an input, you can use basically any web component. And that's awesome. And that's what I work on. But let's talk about art again, because that's what we're talking about. So we make art with brushes. We paint on things, we trace things, and we make apps with components. And the better our brushes were, the better our art is, or the easier our art is. So the better our components are, the easier our apps are going to be able to be built too. So I wanted to show you, I built this really dumb app called Emoji Light, which looks like this. So it basically lets you upload an image, and then it pixelates it, but it replaces every pixel with an emoji. And you can change the resolution so you have more emoji or less emoji. And then it's all text, so you can copy paste it and send it to all of your friends because they're going to love this. But I wanted to build it to tell you how I built this out of web components because I thought that was kind of fun. So if you look at this enormous app, we have an input type equals file, which is kind of like an OG web component, so that's cool. We have some buttons. All of these are normal browser stuff. We have something called a paper slider. So this is an element that my team works on. Paper is like a code word for material design at Google. It was a terrible naming choice that we're now stuck with forever. But that's a fancier slider because if you've ever tried to style a native input type equals range, it's 150 lines of CSS and 1,000 pseudo elements. So that's a fancier slider. That's a fancier checkbox. It looks a little bit pretty. And then in the middle, I have this giant Emoji Light element. And it basically does all the thing. It collects things from the file, so it collects the file contents, and then it collects things from the configuration, so the number of pixels you want on each side and stuff like that. And then every time they change, it gets updated. And the reason why this is important is because these changes are really easy if you've got a data binding sort of system. And that's where Polymer comes into play, because remember I told you I worked on Polymer. So Polymer is kind of like jQuery. I'm trying to pitch this sentence about it. So I think Polymer is kind of like jQuery for web components, not in the sense that you don't need it anymore and everybody hates it and includes 7 versions of it on their site, but in the sense that it sort of sugars the DOM, where it makes DOM interactions a little bit easier while waiting for the DOM to actually get better. Because 15 years ago or 12 years ago, I used to write C++. I didn't actually use jQuery. But writing things was kind of hard. Inserting child nodes and adding child nodes and manipulating the DOM was a little bit of a frustrating experience, and it didn't work in the same way in all the browsers, so that was kind of a pain. Well, Polymer right now, web components are kind of new, and Polymer gives you all this sugar, because I secretly hope that one day we're going to get native data binding on the web, and I keep trying to pitch this to the Blink team. But yeah, the way data binding works is that if you look at this Emoji Light element in the middle, it has a file, or file contents rather, and then a resolution, and then I have an input type equals file at the top. Now, we're pretending here that the input API is actually sane and does something that you want, which it doesn't. But if it would have a value called some file where it contained the data blob, then you could just bind it magically and be well, whenever this thing changes, just teleport it over here. The reason why this is a lie is that you need one line of JavaScript to respond to the event that input type equals file fires. But, it's nice in our dreams. The resolution works like that, though, too. So whenever that slider, you move it around and its value changes, then the resolution gets updated, and you can put it in your custom element. And at this point, I haven't written any JavaScript. I've just written HTML, and I've just used data binding because Polymer sugared it around for me. And the same thing can happen with the checkbox, because one of the things that Emoji Light lets you do, it can show or hide the background of your image to make it a little bit prettier. Now let's talk about custom elements. So this Emoji Light element isn't really that weird. And I wanted to show you that it's like platformy and not like this weird code that you're not familiar with. There's two parts of defining a web component. You have to sort of provide a prototype, so write a class that says what that element does. And then you have to tell the browser to associate a particular tab with that prototype. So that class is just a normal class that extends HTML element. And the second thing at the bottom says, hey, browser, anytime you see Emoji Light and tags like that, just use that prototype over there, and I promise it's going to be a good time. Now with Polymer, Polymer 2, so we're going to, it's a thing that we're announcing at I/O. Polymer element is an extension. It extends HTML element. So it basically takes whatever you would normally do, and then it adds some sugar to it. And then it wraps it all very nicely in what we call a taco. Because what I really like to do is write my HTML in HTML, and my CSS in CSS, and not in JavaScript. I'm really sorry. So one of the things that we can do in Polymer is actually provide what this element looks like in HTML. So this element has a hidden canvas where I'm rendering this pixelated image, and it has a hidden image where I actually load the file that you've given me. And then I output it to this slot called content. And the code isn't very hard. It isn't very special. I have a properties block. I have some properties this element cares about, like that file and resolution and the checkbox where I was binding them. And then I have just JavaScript functions. And whenever that resolution changes, I can call an observer, and it just calls it for me. Now, this isn't very hard. You could write it in vanilla JavaScript. It's just like an event listener, and it's a getter and a setter for a thing called resolution. But if you don't need to write it, you don't have to write it, and that's why Polymer does it for you. Again, kind of like jQuery. See, it just does the heavy lifting for you. That's all the code I'm going to show you. So let's talk about art again. How does Emoji Light actually work? So it pixelates and adds emoji to it, and that's why we have this dumb name. But the real interesting question was, should it use a canvas and should it use a span? They're both going to look the same in the end. But I really wanted to use a span because we're going back to this idea of sharing art. I really want people to be able to share all these dumb productions they're going to make with Emoji Light. And if you have a span, you can copy paste it, and then send it on Slack to all of your friends, and everybody's going to be very happy because all of your history is going to be blown forever and ever. My team's internal code name is Voltron. I don't remember who said. I read this on Twitter. I think Sarah Edo said this recently, where every project or every team has at some point named something internally Voltron, and it's usually an awful combination of things that have been glued together. That's my team. Cool. So how do we actually Emoji Light? How does it actually work? Well, first thing we do is I load your file and I put it into a hidden image. And this is the image that I'm using. It's got lemons. It's cool. Then I have to find its ratio, because I'm going to eventually print it out to a canvas, and that canvas has to be the right size so that your image isn't super wobbly. So then I'm going to resize that canvas, and then I'm going to pixelate it. And pixelating is actually the easiest thing to do on a canvas, because it's basically the thing we've all accidentally done at some point in time, where you take a really tiny image and you stretch it out and print it out when it's enormous and it looks like a potato. That's exactly how we pixelate. You just resize your original image to a tiny little spot, and then you stretch it out, and bam, pixels. Now, if I wanted to just pixelate it, I could stop here, but we gotta put some emoji on it. So I'm gonna divide this into a resolution sort of grid. So here, the resolution is 8, because I have 8 chunks that I'm gonna display across. And then for each of these chunks, the Canvas API actually gives you an array of every single pixel in this file. So all you have to do is go through a sub-array of pixels and calculate the average color. And then I've calculated the average color of every emoji, and then I can just pick the emoji that's closest to the color in that blob. And here I have done very bad things to RGB and assumed it's linear. It's not. So I just take a normal linear distance. It's not correct. It's kind of correct. It's probably not the best emoji for that, but I don't care. It's art. We can get away with this. And then for every single blob in this, I'm going to keep doing this and just put the spans in my output. So at the end, you're going to get a giant pile of spans, all of them containing an emoji that is sort of the color that used to be in that image. Cool. And because it's text, you can copy paste it and then send it. And depending on whatever font you're using, it's going to be warped because Slack doesn't use monospace fonts. So it's like warped lemons. But that's fine, because you've made a thing, and now you can show it to all of your friends, which is exactly what we're trying to do in the first place. So, and all of that was made with web components. And because you can make web components, you should make like a more awesome, artsy web components. Like a Word art web component from like Microsoft, like Windows 95 or Windows 97. I don't remember which one came with like the amazing MS Word art where you can make these abominations and put them in every presentation because they were cool at the time. But wouldn't it be awesome if we can do this with emoji? So I give you a text and you have like a foreground emoji and a background emoji and it says your text. Good news, my coworker implemented this. So then he has this, this is like a custom element that I've made called like an emoji picker. So you pick your emoji, and then you put your text, and then you get awesome things. And because it's a web component, it's like semantically expressive. It was called Emoji Art. You know exactly what it's going to do. And you don't need to know how it works because the implementation is also scary. So cool. I want you to think of web components as like better tools that we can help people make apps, because that's what they are. But in particular, I want you to think of them as tools that we can make people make art and share art on the internet, because that's what I really care about. So do things, share things, tell people how to pixelate their face and put emoji on them. Thanks.